itself. I'm not going to steal too much of your introduction, Matt, but I am joined tonight by Matt Burrows, who has over 15 years across estate agency, franchising, and auctioneering. You've founded and leads one of the Midlands' fastest growing auction departments at Sheldon Bosley Knight. And you have a wealth of knowledge and experience, which is something I can personally attest to, having worked with Matt at Yopa Property a few years ago. I was heading up the customer experience team, or complaints team, and Matt was leading the agents as a regional director for the Southwest. And this isn't smoke. Matt was very highly regarded in the complaints team for his commitment to fixing issues and generally trying to improve the buying and selling process for customers. And as I say, highly regarded within the complaints team for that, which is an accreditation that is not handed out lightly by a complaints team. So thanks very much for joining us tonight, Matt. If you wouldn't mind sharing with everybody a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, David. I mean, so my background, quite an unusual route into property. I was an army officer for a number of years before she got injured. So I went from the infantry and a natural progression into estate agency, lots of transferable skills. Went through the normal estate agency route, negotiator, branch manager, up to the lofty heights of regional director within frontline agency. Started working a little bit in auctions at that time. Moved over into full-time auctions, working as an account manager for National Auction Brand, before moving into lettings as a national operations director for a large lettings franchise. I set up my own consultancy for a few months, and the only reason it was so short is my first client offered me a full-time job where I still sit. I'm a full-time auctioneer, a chartered surveyor, and a proud member of Property Mark, the National Auctioneers and Valuers Association. So I'm a professionally qualified auctioneer. Head up a team of auction professionals, working predominantly in Warwickshire, Coventry, parts of Worcestershire, really into Leicestershire as well. Although we are looking at exploring options of moving more wider in the region over the next couple of years, but watch this space, as they say. I've just been finalising my business plan for the takeover of 2026.
Perfect. I've said to you before the call, auctions is something that I am, and maybe people who have joined us tonight are slight novices of, maybe have not had the opportunity to go to an auction or explore the idea of selling through auction. Is there anything for those like me that whose only exposure to auctions is watching Homes Under the Hammer? What are some of the common misconceptions that you hear about auctions?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally auction is very different to what people are accustomed to, and because it's different, people assume it must be wrong, and there's often a lot of negative connotations around auction. The property must be falling down, the sellers must be desperate, there must be something wrong with this, which is why, and I don't know it, so I don't trust it. And quite often I find a lot of investors, developers, and owner occupiers miss out on some fantastic opportunities just because they don't understand the mechanisms and the process of it. Homes Under the Hammer is the bane of my very existence, because they only really showcase a certain narrative. It's actually not a program about auctions at all. It's a program about house redevelopments. If you think about that program, they will take the unpolished rock at the start of the process and follow that customer journey through their redevelopment through to the end of it, which is, will they sell it, will they rent it, what's it worth? There's very little about the auction itself, maybe 30 seconds at the beginning. They'll never even mention that there's two sides to the equation. There's a buyer and there's a seller. They never look at the work that goes into an auction. It's just bang, and now let's meet the buyers and have a look at the property. So the challenge we get is that for a lot of sellers at auction, unless you're buying a 2-bedroom end terrace in Stoke-on-Trent that's falling down, the assumption is that my property won't be right for auction. Similarly with buyers, they'll see a property that looks in good condition, looks like it doesn't need anything doing to it, and assume that there is something wrong and that's why it's coming to auction. But I'll probably say 75% of my catalogues over the years, there's very little wrong with the property other than cosmetically what you can see. The same with any property, it might need a new bathroom or a new kitchen or a touch of decoration. Yes, some lots are incredibly damaged, but they will be notified. We follow the same material information as estate agents do, so we cannot simply hide behind a survey or a legal pack. If, for example, there is a known structural issue, it will be disclosed in the marketing particulars. So one of the reasons I was really happy when Chris mentioned about this session was to offer a bit of insight into the sort of properties and opportunities that could be just at arm's length.
That was something I was going to delve into. Obviously, you touched on the assumption is that it has to be derelict or falling down for it to be at auction. But what sort of, if I was, is there a particular property type that is suited to the auction process, or is?
I'd say some properties lend themselves more to an auction sale than others. So properties that can attract our core market segmentation. So for us, it's developers, people who are wanting to acquire an asset, add value and resell. Investors, people who are wanting to acquire an asset, maybe add value, but fundamentally unlock the property's potential by way of normally a residential or commercial buy-to-let. And owner-occupiers, people who are wanting their own property for their own purposes. If we can get a property that will attract all of that core market segmentation, that really is unlocking the real potential with auction. In all honesty, though, the main reason why a situation is right for auction has got actually very little to do with the property itself, and a lot more to do with the seller and the motivations behind the sale, more so than the property itself.
Great. Okay. Touched on being a novice to sort of the to auctions. One of the sort of common terminology that you hear is guide price or reserve price, which for someone who's maybe more experienced with the traditional or private sale, what would be the key differences between, I guess, that method, the private sale, and the guided price, reserve price? What's the difference?
So a sale on the open market is known as a sale by private treaty. Private meaning it's through private negotiation, and treaty is an invitation to tort or an invitation to offer. So estate agents will call the price different things, but it's actually the same thing, which is it's an asking price. So if you ever see an estate agent call it a guide price or offers over, offers in the region of, it's really the same thing. It's an indication of what the seller ideally wants to achieve for the property. So say for sake of argument, you see an asking price of £200,000, you will base an offer on that asking price, normally a bit below. And ultimately, a property is worth what a buyer is prepared to pay. So depending on the desirability, how much it ticks all the boxes for your next project, will depend on the offer you submit. It might be 180, 190, or even the full asking price at 200. The difference with a property auction is we focus with our clients, our sellers, initially the reserve price. So with an auction, we start low and finish high. There's an age-old saying in auction, it doesn't matter where it starts, it matters where it finishes. Now, on the rostrum, as an auctioneer, I can't pause the auction while I confirm with my client whether the current bid is enough for them. So we have to have very clear instruction before the auction, the lowest price the sellers are happy to accept. And let's say, for sake of argument, they instruct us that £200,000 is their reserve price. Now, that reserve price is confidential between the seller and the auctioneer, so that's not disclosed. To guide buyers to have an indication on roughly where that reserve price is set, the advertisement uses the guide price as a guide towards where the reserve is. That is public knowledge, public information. Some auctioneers are really quite naughty, and the guide price will have no reflection, no relation to the reserve price at all. I've seen some auctions, the guide's at 100,000, the bidding's gone up to 200,000, and the auctioneer says, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, we haven't quite hit the reserve yet." It bears no relation. Proper professional auctioneers will set their reserve prices no more than 10% above the advertised guide price. You may also sometimes see some auctioneers give a guide price range, for example, between 180 and 200. In that case, the reserve price must be set within that guide price range.
Understood. And I understand, obviously, you said that it's within the sort of 10% mark.
Yep.
And in terms of actually looking at the figures, how would you sort of determine how would you come to that sort of reserve and guide price?
Yeah. So the first thing we would do is look at comparable property sales, look at similar properties that have come on the market, and establish what we would call the full market value for a property. Now, this brings us on to why a customer would choose auction. Because with an open market sale, yes, you will probably achieve the full market price for that property. But what a lot of sellers focus on is choosing an estate agent, setting a price, finding a buyer, and agreeing a sale. And they completely miss how long it takes through solicitors to get that buyer from SSTC through to exchange and completion. Looking at these statistics nationally, there's currently about a 4 to 5 month delay between agreeing a sale and completion, and there's a 30% fall through rate. So about 1 in 3 sales fall through. So from the seller's perspective on the open market, if you were to weigh it up neutrally, yes, you might sell for the highest price, but you need to bear in mind it's an unknown quantity of when I'm going to exchange, when I'm going to complete by. With an auction sale, it's a known quantity. You exchange on the night of the auction, completion's 4 weeks later. Where you are running the risk is your price. Now, you get to have a control measure in place, which is to set a reserve price for that property. Now, if we were to take the full market value and place that as our reserve, the chances are a buyer would look at that and not see the value to them. We wouldn't necessarily generate the competitive bidding interest, which is what's needed in an auction to generate that critical mass of bidders to help push that price up to the market value. So we need sellers to be competitive with their pricing. So the reserve price, when we set it with our clients, is really determined based on what the lowest price they'll sell for. We'll run a metric, work out where we would recommend the reserve price to be. If the two figures marry up, then we've got ourselves an auction lot. If the two figures do not marry up, we will recommend to the sellers they might consider a slightly different route of sale because auction might not be right for them. But any good professional auctioneer will probably turn down more lots than they'll instruct. So it's very different to a estate agency. We don't just put up a board and hope for the best. We're focusing on what's in the seller's best interests, not necessarily what's in our commercial best interests.
Right. Okay. And so you mentioned that obviously you're mitigating the risk of the 30% nationwide fall through rate, the 4 to 5 months of delay in actually getting from sold to completion.
Yeah.
The other side of that is that you have to work you have to work a lot smarter when it comes to the price to make sure that you're still achieving the right price for your sellers. Are there any other potential risks that happen, I guess, during the sales process, because it's very unique to then exchange on the night in comparison to the to SSTC to completion, that 4 or 5 month period? Is there any other risks sort of?
Not as much a risk from a seller's perspective. It's not compatible with creating a chain. So probably not huge impact to this audience, but if you were an owner occupier wanting to auction your own property, it's very difficult to tie in an auction sale with another purchase because the timeframes are so tight. Um, Probably the best way for me to explain why it happens so quickly, because often when people first look into this, say, well, hold on a minute, why can't an estate agent exchange so quickly then? If an auctioneer can, why can't an agent? The basic reason behind it is when with an open market deal, the solicitors don't normally start preparing the contract of sale and purchase until after the deal is agreed. And critically, there are no time frames that both parties are committing to. Both solicitors are working for their client's best interest, not in the deal's best interest. So a buyer solicitor, their sole responsibility is to give the best advice and work for their client, who is the buyer, and not the seller, certainly not the agent or the developer. With an auction sale, all of the legal work happens before the auction. So the title, the searches, the conditions of sale, any law society forms, any legal documents relating to the sale is prepared and available before the auction. So with an auction, it's review the legals, decide the price, exchange. Whereas with an open market transaction, it's decide the price, go through the legals, then exchange. Everything happens with both deals. It's just in different orders, and the timescales are defined in auctions, but undefined on private treaty sales.
Great, thanks. And is there, in terms of if I was a landlord or an investor deciding on the best route for selling, I'm weighing up the estate agency route, or I'm weighing up going to auction. What indicators would I be looking at to determine which is going to be the best route for me?
Yeah, so it's mainly down to four key drivers: price, speed, security, and transparency. Transparency is not normally an indication unless you are a charity or a trust selling an asset where sale in the public domain is imperative. So the three main drivers are price, speed, and security. Um, Effectively, if you're wanting to complete the transaction within a set time frame that's measured in weeks or months, as in 1 or 2 months, and the ramifications of missing that means there's no point in selling the assets to start off with, then an auction is potentially right for you. If price is the sole driving factor and it's sell for the highest possible price, and I'm prepared to take the risk on how long it takes, then the open market is probably the best route. Essentially, what the two different routes invite sellers to consider is, where do you want to place your risk in this transaction? With the open market, you are controlling the risk on price, and you are running the risk on how long the deal takes, how secure that buyer is in place. With an auction sale, you are controlling that risk on how quickly it takes and how secure that buyer is, but you are running the risk on price, albeit you get to set a reserve, which indicates the lowest price the auctioneer has authority to sell for. It's worth bearing in mind that that's not a ceiling price. I'll give an example we had from an auction on the 5th of November. Guide price of 265. The reserve price was confidentially at the time set at 285. This property sold for £376,000. So the seller took a risk on price, and the risk was rewarded. The property was valued by an estate agent on the open market for £350,000. So it actually sold for more than it would have done had it gone on the open market. And critically, the deal went from instruction through to exchange in 4 weeks and 4 days. So it can be unbelievably quick for the right property and the right seller.
Stuff. That's great. Thank you very much. And what if your see the sales process is as we've mentioned different as an auctioneer? Is there any sort of buyer behaviors that would set off alarm bells for you?
As with any property transaction, consumer due diligence is still required at auction. So we do require to see two forms of ID from anyone who's wanting to buy a property. If they're wanting to buy through a company, we just need to ensure they have authority from the majority shareholder or the person with significant control. And if they're overseas buyers, there are additional checks and balances to place. In terms of buyer behaviour, obviously we have our own red flags, which would remain privileged information. But fundamentally, if you're a good, honest buyer who's wanting to engage in an auction, it's really fit for any type of buyer, but predominantly buyers who are either buying through cash means or auction finance or bridging finance, so that they're available to participate immediately in the transaction.
And so, if I was to, you mentioned obviously you need to see IDs. How do, as a seller, I get that security that the people sticking their hands up in the room and putting those offers in, they have those funds available to?
Yeah. So it's a common question we get asked by estate agents, mainly because with a private treaty sale, an estate agent will not book a sale or agree a sale subject to contract without seeing proof of funds, whether that's proof of the money in the bank or an application in principle from a lender. When you boil that down as to why is the agent doing that, they're doing it for two main reasons. Firstly, so they can confirm to their clients that they have no doubt that the buyer is able to exchange. And secondly, so that they can protect their P&L so that they know they're going to get paid. The critical thing is it's actually designed to get up to the point of exchange, not completion. Now, with an auction sale, my hammer dropping indicates an immediate exchange of contracts. So we have now created a contract with the buyer, which means that they are now liable for that 10% deposit. And the reason we get ID from them and do our checks and balances beforehand is so we know who they are. So worst case scenario, we know who to put on the court paperwork when we're litigating for their deposit or for their completion balances. I would hasten to add that in my decade of auctioning property, I've only ever had one transaction that has got to exchange that is not completed, with a success rate of 99.8%. So we need to know as professional auctioneers what we would do in that circumstance, but in reality, it's the exact same success rate as with private treaty between exchange and completion. There might be one or two deals a year across the country that don't complete, but there's no greater risk with an auction sale.
And so significant decrease in risk from the 30% that you mentioned earlier. I'm just going to mention again, if anybody does have a question, this is a live Q&A, so feel free to just drop it into the chat, and we can jump straight into to any questions that you might have. And if not, if you want to save them for the end, we will have a little bit of time then as well. We were having a conversation earlier, Matt, before the call, which really opened my eyes. And I think it is quite an important point to share with anybody thinking about going down the auction route. You were talking to me about that not all auction houses are built the same. There are some rogue traders out there. And if I was in the position where I was looking to sell through an auction house, what can I do to protect myself?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because the qualifications to become an auctioneer are nil. Anyone in this audience could buy the auctioneer tablets, as they're known, which are the bidding regulations, and set up their own auction. They'd be pretty useless at it, but they could give it a go. So choosing an auctioneer is really critical. The first thing to look at is, firstly, is the firm regulated by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, by RICS? Does the auctioneer hold a certification with the RICS? I myself am a member of RICS. And does the auctioneer have professional qualifications, normally through an organisation called Property Mark? So you're looking for post-nominals after the person's name, MRICS, MNAVA, NAVA standing for the National Auctioneers and Valuers Association. The reason why that's critical is that, firstly, these organisations will not just admit anybody. There is a criteria for applying for selection. And obviously, as the Chartered Surveyor route, there's a huge amount of work that goes into both the individual and the firm being regulated and a membership of the RICS. But critically, these organisations also have independent redress schemes. So if there was ever an issue, yes, you could go down the property ombudsman, but you could also raise a complaint with that professional body, which would then conduct a thorough investigation. So I myself, whenever I am giving advice to my client, I do so primarily in what is in the best interest of my client. But secondly, and I suppose most importantly for this audience, I do things that will be in the best interest of upholding the professionalism within my chosen field, i.e. auctioneering. So I have a duty by the RICS to uphold the integrity of every auction I do. And if I was ever to fall foul of the professional statements or guidelines by the RICS, I could lose my membership, which would have a massive material impact on my firm and my career. So why is that important? Well, that's important because it means that if you are dealing with professionals who hold those qualifications, hold those certifications, and hold those memberships, there's a lot at stake if we were to get it wrong. So we always, we can't ever guarantee that mistakes won't happen, but we always deal with them very quickly, very professionally. And customer service, as we mentioned at the beginning, has always been a pet passion of mine. And I want to find when things aren't going 100% to solve the root cause of the problems that have got us into that position.
That's good. Good way to. So it's a very. It can be a very quick win just to do a small amount of due diligence on the auction house that you're looking at, and in an industry that isn't regulated. It's good that there are organisations out there. You mentioned Rick's Property Mark that set that standard, and if you're approaching an auction house with the logos on the website, or as you've mentioned, the letters after the name, and that they're adhering to those standards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. Looking ahead, where do you see sort of auctions evolving in the next 2 to 3 years in the UK market?
So I think we're predicting or looking at the market trends to see more properties taken into possession over the next 2 to 3 years. Certainly with the interest rates that have been hiked, we're starting to see more properties in possession this year. Properties in possession, by and large, are sold at auction, not exclusively, but a fair proportion of them are. The auction market is growing at a rate of about 12% year on year, certainly 12% up from last year and about 14% up from the year before. So it's quite a quickly evolving market. And I think why that's important is my belief is that within the next 2 to 3 to 5 years, we'll reach a critical mass where enough of the market is aware of auction, isn't scared of buying and selling at auction, that it'll open up the floodgates into more and more and more people trusting the process of selling by auction. Because really, auction is open and available to any customer, but primarily for customers with vacant properties, properties that by themselves have no chain. And that must be 20 to 25% of the housing market, I'd estimate. So I'm anticipating auction becoming a bigger and bigger player in the wider UK property market.
A larger space for more opportunities to explore as well.
Yeah.
The something that you were discussing earlier in terms of the level of due diligence that needs to be carried out on a property prior to it being marketed. It got me. It got me as a really weird anecdote, but it got me thinking about the World Cup qualifiers with Scotland the other night, because it sounded a very Scottish way of doing things, of getting all your house in order before it goes on the market. So I take it that was to do with legal packs. So could you just give me sort of a talk through from an investor, a landlord who's looking to go through the auction space? What is a legal pack? How would I contribute to compiling one? At what point do I need to start considering it?
Yeah, so legal packs must be available prior to the auction sale. So we occasionally have issues that solicitors pick up on, or problems we can't solve with the solicitor, by the time the auction comes around. We have no option as auctioneers but to withdraw that property from the sale. We can't simply say, oh, it'll be okay, we'll just sell it anyway. So legal packs will always be available, normally about 2 weeks prior to the auction, sometimes further ahead, but certainly 2 weeks is the standard amount of time. Contained within the legal pack, you'll have the title, so giving confirmation on the seller's authority to sell. So they may be named as the proprietor, there may be a power of attorney, there may be the executor, but all the documentations confirming the authority for the individual to sell will be there. You'll have all the normal law society forms, so the TA6, the TA10, documents you'd normally expect to see within a sale pack. You'll have searches, normally a local search, a water and drainage search, and an environmental search. If it's relevant to the location, you could have other types of search in there, for example, a chancellery search or a mine, coal and mine search may also be in there as well. You'll also have the auction conditions, which outline the methodology in which the property is being sold, and the auction contracts, which will confirm any potential liabilities or additional fees for the buyers to pay on completion, as well as the mechanics on how the sale will be contractually wrapped up. So essentially, contained within the legal pack, a buyer has got everything that they need to enable them to exchange contracts. In terms of some top tips from me as an auctioneer, firstly, I'd say download and read the legal pack. Last year, the UK's largest software provider for auctioneers, a company called the Essential Information Group, they probably hold about 90 to 95% of all auctioneers nationally. Their stats said that 35.9% of all auction buyers last year did not access the legal pack. So the first thing I'd say is let's keep it simple. Read the legal pack. Secondly, I'd say if legal language is not your forte, appoint a solicitor to review the legal pack and allow them to signpost any issues or potential liabilities that could be there. It gives you confidence when bidding. Obviously, you've got view the property. 99% of all auction lots will be available to view beforehand. Occasionally, due to health and safety concerns, we will not permit internal inspections, but the reason why will normally be indicated. And also, you can have structural or surveys done on properties prior to the auction, should you require to do so for secured lending or for peace of mind. What I would say is the earlier you engage with the auctioneer prior to the auction, the more chance you've got to achieve all of those aims within the time frame in place.
And it's fascinating that you said, even though the information is available, and particularly something that if you go down the traditional route, as we know, searches you could be waiting quite a while for, you have that information readily available before you even take any further decisions. So yeah, I think that's a really important point, that's definitely something that buyers need to engage with and going down the auction route.
100%. Searches can take a while, but we as auctioneers, as soon as we know we have a lot coming up for an auction, we'll order searches the same day. So I received instructions for an auction sale in February. I ordered the searches today. So we know that the searches will come back within 3 to 4 weeks, but we then have them ready and waiting within the time frame for that sale.
Great, thanks, Matt. We've had a couple of questions pop into the chat. So Josephine's asked, "Hi Matt, what can I do to inquire about a property that failed to sell at the auction, say about 4 months ago? Can I still go to the auctioneer or direct to the vendor?"
So without understanding the auctioneer's terms of business, I don't know is the simple answer, Josephine, because most auctioneers operate what's called sole selling rights, which means that if a buyer was introduced to the property during the period of agency, then the auctioneer can claim a fee from the seller within a fixed period of time. Normally 12, can be up to 24 months. Obviously, I don't know the reason. As you're saying, the property failed to sell at auction. It could well be that the auctioneer is still under contracts with that seller. They might be reviewing the situation. maybe having a pause and then relaunching it at a future auction. I'd say that the vast majority, I think my figures last year, 95% of all properties that we instructed were sold. Some required a second or even a third auction cycle to be successful. So it could be that they're waiting for something to be resolved before bringing it back to the room. But what I'd say, Josephine, is to write to the auctioneers expressing your interest, and see whether a deal can be struck. Normally, the key questions they'd be wanting to understand is, are you in an immediately proceedable position, or do you need to raise finance? Do you need to sell your property first? So it really depends on your circumstances as to how excited they'd be about the proposition.
Great, thanks, Matt. Donna, who has clearly been on the webinars before, because I didn't even plug the Q&A, the Q&A feature, and Donna's got her question on there. So thank you very much for that, Donna. I viewed a property which an offer I made was rejected. The seller also rejected previous offers from others. It's now due to go to auction, and as a new developer, I would be going through bridging finance, but I'm concerned that 4 weeks is very tight. Do you have any recommendations if I decide to bid? Should I give... do you have any recommendations for me if I decide to bid in regards to the finance?
Yeah, I mean, we work very closely with a couple of auction finance providers, Donna. I'm more than happy to connect and put you in the right direction. But I was once at an auction that I was conducting, and a buyer approached us and said, look, I only viewed the property today. I need to buy with auction finance. I've come down because I know I'm going to miss out. There's no way I can get it sorted. We had a representative from the auction finance provider there. They reached a decision on lending availability within 20 minutes, and they bid in confidence at the auction and completed on time 20 working days later. So the best advice I can give you is choose an auction finance provider rather than a bridging loan provider. The reason being is most auction finance is by the mechanism of a bridging loan by its nature. But if you're dealing with a company that specializes in raising finance for auction, they understand the timescales in place. They know the questions to ask up front. They understand the ramifications of missing deadlines, and they're more structured in getting the advice for purchasing at auction. Whereas I've known a number of bridging loan companies who have said, yes, we can lend against auction, but then there have been bumps down the line because they haven't considered various points down the line. So I'd certainly recommend speaking to a specialist auction finance firm first, but 4 weeks in auction is acres of time. We can get deals wrapped up with a bridging, with an auction finance company, as I said, with hours. Ideally, we've got days, if not a couple of weeks, but 4 weeks is more than enough time to get everything sorted.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. And thank you, Donna and Josephine, for providing your questions. I'm just going to leave the... there we go. I was just about to say I'm going to leave the floor open just to see if anybody else would like to share any more questions. We've had one come in just now. How do I know that this is two-tiered questions? We'll just take this first one. How do I know the properties before they're published on the auction list?
Okay, so auction catalogues will be a live. They'll be a live beast. So with our catalogues open 6 weeks before the auction event. We'll be building our catalogue for 2 to 3 weeks, and then we will close our catalogue normally 3 to 4 weeks before the auction event takes place. The best advice I could give would be to understand which auctioneers you know and trust locally that are selling properties within your area. Sign up to national auction firms as well, if it's more of a national footprint you're looking at, and ask to be put on their mailing list. That way, whenever a catalogue is published, you can review it and have a good look through. There's a very, very good website called the Essential Information Group. So it's the Essential Information Group. Now you can get a free account, or you can also pay for a premium account with them, and you can view the entire auction market nationally. So properties that are coming up, properties that have been unsold, and properties that are available right now. Um, Looking at your next question, what are the high risk areas or issues or liabilities that you come across in properties sold through auction?
Yes.
Um, High risk areas. I'm, do you mean in terms of location or high risk um, aspects of the property? I think you probably mean high risk aspects. I'd say that there are some properties that the reason they're sold at auction is because there is a problem. That could be subsidence, it could be suspected structural, it could be flooding, it could be some minor legal issues to do with the title or restrictive covenants. Whenever, as an auctioneer, we know about a known issue, we'll always make sure buyers are signposted to that known issue. Anything that would have a material impact on a buyer's decision whether to purchase that property or not. There aren't any greater risks in buying a property at auction than there are in buying a property on the open market, in the sense of properties can have skeletons hidden in the closet that nobody was aware of, not the agent, not the seller, and sometimes surveyors miss it on inspections. What you can do about it, though, is by making sure that your due diligence checks are sound. You do a thorough inspection, and if you have any issues or any potential issues, you have them reviewed professionally by a chartered surveyor or structural engineer.
Thanks, Matt. And I think the third, this was something I was going to ask off the back of Donna's question, was that do you have any solicitors, or would an auction house have an auction finance provider that they can recommend, or that you could recommend?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of solicitors, it is still quite regional. There are specialist auction law firms out there, but they tend to be wholly owned by the firms that operate them. For example, I Am Sole own a firm called Medway Law. What I'd recommend in terms of choosing a solicitor is, in the same way that you would choose a solicitor with an open market sale, you would, if you're buying properties regularly, you'll probably have a preferred solicitor who you work with regularly. Simply ask them, are they able to handle auction purchases, auction sales? Most solicitors or conveyancers can do. Otherwise, ask the auctioneer, do you recommend anyone who you could recommend as a preferred solicitor? Yes, we get a kickback from it, but that's not the reason we recommend it. We've chosen a solicitor based on their proven track record in completing deals promptly, efficiently, and accurately. Three things that we need to have happening with an auction sale. We don't want to have a solicitor that's going to drag their heels so that their clients are running the risk of failing to complete. Auction finance providers, absolutely. Together Money have been in the auction financing game for many, many, many years. They work in a very different way to high street lenders. If anybody here does use them, please tell them that Matt from Sheldon Bosley Knight has told you to use them, so we can grow our ever-growing relationship with them. But they come to every one of our auctions. They're a fantastic bunch, and they're the firm that gave a lending decision within 20 minutes of an auction taking place. So for me, they've got a thorough track record in the auction market.
That's great, Matt. And I think this we've had a question from Andrew in the chat that I think ties into to what you were just saying about solicitors. But this is specifically looking at, so when preparing a legal pack for a property going to auction, does the seller use a specific can they use any solicitor, or does it have to be a specific one provided by the auction house?
No. Any auctioneer that tells you must use their solicitor, that for me is an instant red flag. First thing I'll say to my seller clients when we start talking about preparing the legal aspect of the sale is that you're welcome to use any solicitor that you wish to use. The only caveat on that is just ensure that firstly their firm can provide an auction sale service. Not all law firms do. Even conveyancing firms specialising in property sales don't always have an auction facility. So they don't always have people trained, ready, willing and able to prepare a legal pack. 99% of auctioneers will have a firm of solicitors that they use regularly. And again, yes, that auctioneer will get a referral fee for introducing their client to the law firm. But the reason we've chosen them over the dozen or so other firms locally we could have done, certainly in my case, is because I know the firm. I recommend one or two firms, but both of them proven to me time and time and time again they can get a legal pack prepared promptly, efficiently, thoroughly. And if there are any issues, they're flagged up nice and early, so we can find solutions to those problems. But Andrew, you can fundamentally choose anybody you're comfortable with.
Great, thanks, Matt. The question that just come into the Q&A was just asking if you could repeat the names of the solicitors and auction finance providers again.
Absolutely, Dave. Yeah, I mean, solicitors. I'd say that there's not a national firm of solicitors I'd recommend. There is a firm I've used quite a lot called Heck Jones. That's HEK space JONES. They're based in Cardiff, but cover nationally. The auction finance company is called Together Money. Together Money. They're great.
Thanks, Matt. Just going to see if there's any final questions that you'd like to drop in. Just drop them in the chat or the Q&A. And if not, we will be wrapping up shortly. Because every minute that we continue the webinar, I'm rolling the dice for either my dog starting to bark or the kids breaking out from their bedrooms and then start running behind me. That's great. Matt, in terms of the attendees, if they want to find out more, if they've got further questions that they maybe weren't sure to ask in the chat tonight, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so obviously using the social network, you can drop me a message directly through there. I'm a member, but I will also give my email address if anyone wants to take a note of it. It's Matt MATT .Burrows BURROWS at Sheldon SHELDON Bosley BOSLEY Knight KNIGHT.co.uk. In fact, I'll drop it in the chat so people can see it there.
That's great. Thanks very much. That's all for the webinar tonight. So thank you very much, Matt, for joining us. I think Chris, before I jumped on the call, also wanted to extend his thanks very much. If, like I say, as Matt said, if you do have any questions, then you can reach out either at that email address or by joining UK Homes Network. Find both myself and Matt in there. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us. And we will be back to normal service next week, where you will get Chris's face instead of mine. So thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thanks. Bye.